Hi, I am Lena. I want to tell you my story.
I always thought I was careful. Careful with my words, careful with my work, careful with my trust. My life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. And in my mind, predictability was safety. That morning felt like hundreds of others before it. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the kitchen. I remember the smell of coffee drifting through the air, wrapping itself around me like a familiar blanket. The blinds were half open, letting in stripes of sunlight that painted the walls in soft gold. My favorite mug sat in front of me, the one with a small chip on the handle. I traced my finger over that chip without thinking, a tiny imperfection I had grown fond of. Outside, the street was just beginning to stir. A child's laugh echoed faintly from somewhere down the block. A delivery van rumbled past. I felt anchored in that quiet rhythm of morning life. Safe. It's strange how disasters arrive. Sometimes they give you warnings, a faint tremor before the earthquake, a shift in the wind before the storm. But that day, there was nothing. One moment I was sipping my coffee, and the next, my phone began to ring. The name on the screen belonged to a colleague I rarely spoke to outside the office. Her voice was low, urgent. She told me there was something I needed to see, something that couldn't wait. I could hear the hesitation in her breath, like she wasn't sure if she should be saying it at all. Then she told me. Our company had just held a major executive meeting. My boss, the man I had worked under for 7 years, the man who had once praised my creativity in front of the entire team, had presented my project as his own. Not just the broad idea, but every single detail. My designs, my research, my words. Months of late nights, of pushing through exhaustion, of believing I was creating something that mattered, all erased with the simple removal of my name. At first, I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that didn't even feel like mine. I told her there must be some mistake, but she had already sent me a copy of the presentation. When I opened the file, my stomach turned cold. It was my work. I could see my style in every slide, my thought process in every note. But where my name should have been, there was his. It was as if I had been written out of my own story. I didn't know what to feel first: shock, disbelief, or the deep, twisting sense of betrayal. My mind raced with questions that had no answers. How long had he planned this? Had he been smiling at me in meetings while plotting to take what I had built? And worse, did anyone else know? I set my phone down, my coffee now forgotten. My hands were trembling. I told myself I'd deal with it later, that I needed time to think before reacting, but the universe wasn't done with me yet. That afternoon, I found my husband's phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed with a message. I wasn't looking for trouble. I wasn't suspicious, but the name on the screen stopped me cold. It was my boss. My first thought was that it must be about work, maybe a continuation of the morning's betrayal. But the words in the preview, they weren't about work. They were personal. Too personal. I felt the blood rush from my face. My hands went numb. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And with every line I read, the air in the room seemed to thicken. It wasn't just a professional betrayal I was dealing with. It was personal. Intimate. The two people I had trusted most, the man I shared a home and a life with, and the man I had built my career under, had crossed lines I hadn't even thought to guard. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. My breath came in shallow bursts. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make it stop. But instead, I stood there in silence. staring at the screen until it went black. In a single day, the world I had built for myself cracked open. My job, my marriage, my trust, all gone. As if the ground beneath my feet had vanished. People talk about heartbreak as though it's loud. Shouting, slamming doors, breaking glass. But for me, it wasn't noise. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you realize nothing will ever be the same again. And as the sun set that evening, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, I sat alone in the kitchen holding an empty mug, wondering how I was supposed to live in a world where the sky could fall without warning. There is a kind of silence that doesn't comfort you. It doesn't invite peace. It sits, heavy in the air, pressing down on your chest until you can barely breathe. That's the silence I woke up to the next morning. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the light shift from gray to pale gold. Hours must have passed before I moved. My body felt weightless and heavy at the same time, as if I were floating in water too deep to stand in. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears didn't come. Instead, there was only a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from holding back everything you can't put into words. I drifted through the house like a stranger. The furniture looked the same. The photographs on the wall still smiled back at me, frozen in moments I could no longer believe in. The smell of coffee still lingered from the day before, but even that felt wrong, as if it belonged to another version of me, one who still believed the ground beneath her was solid. The hours blurred together. I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my phone lying face down on the table. I didn't want to see the messages I knew were waiting. Questions from friends, maybe. Apologies that didn't mean anything. Maybe excuses I wasn't ready to hear. At some point, I tried to eat. I made toast, but I couldn't taste it. The bread felt like sand in my mouth. I left it on the plate untouched. I caught myself glancing toward the door every time a car passed, half expecting him to walk in, to tell me it was all a mistake. But the door stayed closed. The house stayed still. That night, I lay in bed with the lights off, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the distance. The sound was almost comforting, the only proof that time was still moving forward, even if I wasn't. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept circling back, replaying moments I had missed, small pauses in conversations, strange absences, the way he sometimes smiled at his phone instead of at me. I saw them all now, lined up like warning signs I had ignored. In the darkness, I whispered to myself, "No one is coming to save you." It wasn't defeat, not yet. It was simply the truth. And in that truth, there was the faintest flicker of something I didn't recognize at first. The smallest spark of defiance, buried under all the pain. But for now, the hours were still hollow, and I let them be. The morning after the hollow hours, I awoke to the sound of rain. It tapped softly against the windows, a quiet rhythm that seemed almost patient, as if it knew I wasn't ready to move quickly. I stayed in bed for a long time, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. I could have stayed there all day, but something in me, something small, almost invisible, stirred. It wasn't strength, not yet. It was simply the thought that I couldn't let every day feel like yesterday. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and felt the cold floor under my feet. That small shock of chill grounded me. I stood, walked to the mirror, and stopped. The face staring back at me was tired, pale, unfamiliar. My hair hung in tangled strands. My eyes had that glassy look like they belonged to someone who had been lost at sea. But behind them, I saw something else. The faintest glint of a woman who wasn't ready to disappear. I made coffee. Not because I wanted it, but because the act itself felt like a declaration. I am still here. As the steam curled upward from the cup, I remembered a time years ago, before my marriage, before this job, when I had been alone and starting over. Back then, I thought I couldn't survive on my own. But I did, piece by piece, day by day. And if I could do it once, maybe I could do it again. I found a notebook in the drawer, blank pages waiting for a story. My hands trembled as I opened it, not from fear, but from the weight of beginning. I wrote one sentence. This is where I start again. It was clumsy, too simple, not at all the grand declaration I imagined. But it was enough. The rest of the day I cleaned. Not everything, just the desk where I used to work on my projects. Dust clung to my fingers, and the scent of lemon cleaner filled the air. I opened the windows to let in the damp, fresh smell of rain. It wasn't about the desk. It was about claiming space again, reminding myself that I had a place in this house that was mine. When evening came, I lit a single candle and placed it on the desk. The flame flickered, reflecting off the dark window. Small, but steady. That night, I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel strong, but I felt awake. And maybe that was the first spark. The morning came quietly, but this time I didn't stay in bed. The air felt different, somehow lighter, and I wanted to see how far I could carry that feeling before it faded. I made coffee, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and tied my hair back. It wasn't about looking good. It was about looking ready. The first thing I did was take my phone off the table. For days, I had avoided it, letting messages pile up like unopened letters from another life. My fingers hovered over the screen before I finally began deleting things. I deleted his number, then my boss's number, then the photos. Not just of them together, those I never had, but the ones where I had been smiling beside people who had already decided to betray me. It felt brutal, almost surgical, but with every swipe, I felt the smallest shift in my chest, like something heavy loosening its grip. After that, I opened my closet and began pulling out clothes. Not everything, just the ones that didn't feel like mine anymore. The dresses I had worn to company events, the sweater he once said was his favorite, the heels I bought for a promotion that never came. I folded them into a box without ceremony. By noon, my living room was littered with piles. Keep, donate, discard. I hadn't planned to clean my whole life in one day, but once I started, I couldn't stop. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving a sharp, bright sunlight that streamed through the windows. It lit up the dust motes floating in the air, tiny pieces of the old life still lingering. I took the donation box to my car. Driving felt strange after days inside, like stepping into a world that hadn't noticed my absence. People still walked their dogs, still carried groceries, still honked at traffic. The normalcy of it all was almost shocking. At the donation center, I carried the box inside. The woman at the counter thanked me, and for the first time in days, I smiled. Not a full smile, not yet, but something close. On the drive home, I stopped at a small park. I didn't plan it. I just saw the open space, the sunlight glinting off the pond, and I pulled over. I sat on a bench, letting the breeze touch my face. Around me, life moved easily. Children chasing each other, ducks gliding across the water, leaves shifting in the wind. None of it knew my story. None of it cared. And somehow that was freeing. Before I left, I opened my notebook again. Beneath the first line I had written, "This is where I start again," I added a second. And today, I took something back. It wasn't much, but it was a break in the pattern, and that was enough for now. The morning sun spilled into the apartment, bright and unrelenting, as if urging me forward. I woke with a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Not a grand purpose, not yet, but enough to move. I began with small things: the dishes I had left in the sink, the floor that needed sweeping, the laundry that had piled up like silent witnesses to my inertia. Each task, mundane and ordinary, felt like reclaiming a fragment of my life. I opened my notebook. This time, instead of just thoughts, I wrote a list: tasks, goals, ideas, nothing too ambitious, just steps that felt doable. Walk 30 minutes today, call mom, research new projects. Each line a small declaration. I am active. I am present. I am taking control. By noon, I was outside, walking. The streets were familiar but new. I noticed the cracks in the sidewalk, the leaves clinging stubbornly to the trees, the way sunlight made the pavement glow. For the first time in a long while, I felt my body moving with intention. I stopped at a cafe I had passed hundreds of times, but never entered. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, notebook open. I sketched ideas for a personal project I had abandoned long ago, something that had excited me before life had gotten in the way. The hours passed, measured not by the weight of sadness, but by purpose. I began calling people I had avoided not out of guilt, but out of reconnection. Friends, family, even colleagues who had always respected my work. Small interactions that reminded me the world hadn't stopped, and neither had I. Returning home, I tackled the more significant challenges: bills, emails, paperwork that once felt overwhelming. Step by step, I cleared the clutter that had mirrored my inner chaos. Each completed task was a small triumph. By evening, I lit the candle on the desk once again. Its flame flickered in the quiet room, steady and unwavering. I opened my notebook and wrote, "I am building again, one piece at a time." I wasn't healed, I wasn't invincible, but I was moving forward, and movement was everything. I realized that rebuilding wasn't about rushing. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, action, and trust in the gradual unfolding of life. And tonight, as the city hummed softly outside my window, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. The morning air carried a freshness I hadn't noticed in months. I woke early, heart lighter, mind sharper, and a small anticipation humming beneath my skin. I began my day with the routines I had reclaimed: coffee, sunlight, notebook, a short walk. But today, there was a different energy. I felt the weight of inertia lifting, replaced by a quiet excitement, a sense that something I had long postponed was finally within reach. I returned to my personal project, the one I had abandoned years ago. Ideas flowed more freely than I expected. Every sketch, every note, every little plan built upon the last, creating momentum. The hours slipped by unnoticed, each one a brick in the foundation of something new. By afternoon, I sent out the first official message.
not tentative emails to acquaintances, but a clear presentation of my vision to someone I respected. The response came faster than I imagined. Interest, encouragement, even an invitation to discuss next steps. My chest swelled in quiet disbelief. It wasn't a grand triumph yet, not a life-altering victory, but it was mine. The first tangible proof that I could create, act, and be recognized for it. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to savor it. I walked through the city streets afterwards, lighter on my feet, noticing colors, patterns, life around me that had been invisible in the fog of despair. I smiled at strangers and felt a small, radiant echo of their smiles in return. Connection felt effortless again, a reminder that the world was alive and welcoming. Returning home, I reviewed my notebook. Each completed task, each step forward seemed smaller now, in isolation, but together they painted a picture of progress. I traced a finger along the page, reading aloud quietly to myself. Today, I built something real. Today, I proved I can. The candle on the desk flickered as the evening light waned. Its warmth reflected in the window, steady, small, but resilient. Victory wasn't about external validation. It was about self-trust, momentum, and courage to continue. I realized that this first success, this first spark of recognition, was the key to everything else. And for the first time in months, I felt hope untempered by doubt. The sunlight poured through the windows like a quiet celebration, warm and insistent. I woke early again, not out of obligation, but because the world outside seemed to whisper that today demanded motion, not hesitation. I began with a deliberate stretch, feeling the muscles in my arms and back wake after weeks of neglect. Movement was no longer just physical, it was symbolic, a reclamation of agency over a life that had felt stalled for far too long. By mid-morning, I was at my desk, reviewing plans with a precision I hadn't thought I was capable of. Every decision carried weight, yet I felt confident. Confidence didn't mean arrogance. It was the calm understanding that my choices mattered, and that I had earned the right to trust myself. I reached out to collaborators, old and new. I pitched ideas, received feedback, and incorporated it swiftly. Each small interaction built momentum, a chain reaction of progress and mutual respect. Where before I had doubted my voice, now it resonated clearly and purposefully. The afternoon brought a flurry of tasks: paperwork, emails, research, and preparation. I moved seamlessly between them, not hurriedly, but with intent and focus. It was a dance of competence, each step reinforcing the last. Around late afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the park again. The familiar trees and pond were now companions rather than mere scenery. I noticed how the sunlight danced on the water, how the leaves whispered in the wind. Nature's rhythm mirrored my own. It was steady, resilient, and alive. I sat on a bench, notebook in hand, drafting ambitious plans for the coming months. For the first time, I allowed myself to think beyond immediate survival. I envisioned a life not dictated by loss or betrayal, but shaped by initiative, creativity, and personal vision. As evening approached, I called my mentor. The conversation was warm, affirming, and full of practical guidance. I felt supported yet independent, buoyed yet grounded. Every word reinforced a realization that had been forming quietly. Strength is not solitary. True power grows when shared, when connected, when applied with wisdom. Returning home, I organized the workspace that had become the center of my rebirth. Notebooks, sketches, and plans were now arranged with care, a visual testament to deliberate progress. The candle flickered softly, reflecting the steady rhythm of a life in motion. I sat back and closed my eyes, feeling the pulse of accomplishment without boastfulness. The small victories of the past weeks had coalesced into a momentum I could sustain. I had learned that strength is not sudden or spectacular. It is consistent, deliberate, and patient. And as night fell, I wrote one final note in my notebook for the day. I am moving. I am building. I am unstoppable, not because nothing can hurt me, but because I choose to rise anyway. It was not hubris. It was truth. And for the first time, I understood that my life, my story, was no longer defined by the past, but by the motion I maintained toward my own becoming. The morning light spilled over the horizon, painting the city in gold and soft shadows. I awoke slowly, savoring the stillness, the rhythm of my breath, the pulse of life that no longer felt heavy or restrained. I had arrived at a moment I had once believed impossible. Clarity without doubt, strength without fear, and peace without complacency. I moved through my morning routine with a ritualistic grace. The coffee brewed, the pages of my notebook turned with a satisfying rustle, and the sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting sketches and plans that had been the blueprint of my transformation. Each item, each gesture, carried meaning. Every small action was no longer mundane. It was deliberate, a thread weaving the tapestry of my rebirth. As I sat by the window, watching the city awaken, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayals, the losses, the moments of doubt, they were no longer chains, but lessons. Each had carved a space for resilience, for insight, for the unyielding conviction that my life could be authored by my own hand. The scars were visible, yet they did not define me. They had strengthened the very core of who I had become. I reviewed my plans for the day, meetings with collaborators, creative sessions, calls with mentors and friends. But today, I approached them differently, not as obligations or checkpoints, but as expressions of agency, avenues to shape my world intentionally. Every interaction was imbued with awareness, empathy, and confidence. Midday arrived with its own cadence. I walked through the streets with purpose, feeling the rhythm of life sync with my own heartbeat. The city was alive, vibrant, a mirror of the internal energy I now carried. I passed familiar places that had once felt oppressive or dull. Now they shimmered with possibility. Faces that had been strangers smiled, sometimes acknowledging my presence, sometimes simply reflecting the shared pulse of a world in motion. I returned smiles in kind, a simple act of connection that reinforced my place in the world. I stopped at a small art gallery I had noticed weeks ago but never entered. Today, curiosity drove me. The space was filled with color, texture, and narrative, each piece a story of creation, struggle, and expression. I wandered slowly, absorbing the energy, letting the art communicate what words could not. I felt a kinship with each creator, a silent acknowledgement that growth, resilience, and vision were universal experiences. Back home, I organized my workspace once again, arranging notebooks, sketches, and project materials with care and intention. Each object now held a narrative of its own, a testament to persistence, focus, and transformation. The candle burned steadily, a quiet witness to the culmination of effort, patience, and unwavering dedication. Evening arrived, and I sat quietly with my notebook, pen poised. I began to write, not a plan or task, but a reflection, an acknowledgement of the arc of my journey. I was broken, and I became whole. I was lost, and I found myself. I was afraid, and I embraced courage. Every step, every misstep, every tear, every moment of doubt was necessary. They shaped me, tempered me, and led me here, to a life authored by my own hand, guided by my own vision. I paused, taking a deep breath. For the first time, I felt the fullness of my own story. The past no longer whispered with regret. It spoke with clarity, offering wisdom and gratitude. The future was not an intimidating void, but a canvas, expansive and open, ready for my deliberate strokes. I rose and walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Each light was a life, a story, a movement, and I felt an unspoken kinship with all of it. I was not alone. I was part of the rhythm of life, contributing my own energy, my own momentum, my own vision. Night settled softly around me. I lit the candle on my desk one final time, watching its flame dance in the quiet room. It was not just a flame, it was a symbol. The illumination of resilience, the warmth of self-trust, and the steady glow of deliberate motion. I closed my notebook and exhaled, letting the weight of my journey dissolve into presence. Victory had never been a destination. It had been the accumulation of choices, actions, and unwavering determination. I had learned that true power is not the absence of fear or adversity, but the courage to rise and act anyway. And in that quiet, golden night, I whispered to myself, I am whole. I am alive. I am the author of my life, and this is only the beginning.